Thank you, Caroline. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure to be here. I'm a person from technology, so I guess most of you are not in hardcore technology today. Some of you have been. Nevertheless, I think it's important to share a few of the things that happened in the photovoltaic sector in technology development in relation to market development over the past decades. This is about rural access to energy. And I start with this slide because it is one of the main arguments that drove me into PV technology development many years ago, about 1980. And Caroline's father, Jan Nijland, played a very important role in that because he made a strong plea for photovoltaics in rural applications throughout the time that I knew him. So it is also one of the reasons that I'm here. However, over time, the photovoltaic sector lost focus on this very important application for several reasons. The same happened to a large extent to the, you could say, the ultimate argument for the introduction of solar energy in the world. Originally, this was resource depletion. So one day we will run out of fossil fuels and then we have to have some alternative. Well, this seems like a very long time ago because this argument no longer holds. It has rather been reversed in recent years because we now have a bubble rather than depletion. And this has led, of course, to, for instance, the conference in Paris last year and the strive for 100% renewables, at least by part of the participants in that conference, which now dominates the debate in renewables and in particularly also in solar energy. In addition to that, of course, there's some other arguments why we still work on solar energy deployment and technology development. Reducing the energy dependence is, especially in Europe, but also I think in the United States, a very important argument for the introduction of renewables, which have a potential within the boundaries of Europe, United States, Japan, you name it. So this is another argument that still holds very strongly. And when looking back at the early days of photovoltaics and then referring to one of the key policy arguments that the former Minister of Economic Affairs, Hans Wijers, in the Netherlands had, he talked about the so-called U-turn in the development. So he says, in those days, we're talking, I think, the 90s, but Chris Westra knows better the dates, I guess. Let's first develop the high-value markets for photovoltaics as long as the technology is expensive. And high-value markets were primarily the rural access markets. So where one module or two modules can make a big difference and where it's not about the cost of kilowatt hours, but about the value of having energy or having energy for services. So the intention was to first go to the rural applications, and then when this would have been developed to high volumes, large numbers of people, then the technology would be cheap and we would be able to apply it in the grid-connected markets, which are to a certain extent low-value markets because that's all about the generation cost or the cost of electricity. Now, as you know, things went completely differently. We started with high-cost PV, but then because there were incentivized markets in Germany, but many other countries in the world, the technology went down in cost. And now, let's hope that we can go back to really ambitious development of the markets in rural applications now that the technology has become cheap. So let's benefit from this reverse of the U-turn, although I think it has led to a great delay in the large-scale deployment of solar energy in rural applications compared to what was once expected or hoped for. Now, this is what the volume of the grid-connected markets resulted in. This is from Bloomberg. I think you had a person from Bloomberg this morning. This was published on the internet in 2014. We, let's say, we discuss the evolution of the cost of fossil fuels like oil, gas, and coal. But while discussing this, something much more spectacular is actually happening. And prices of solar energy and cost of generation of solar electricity has come down like a rocket. And it's now starting to compete directly with electricity from fossil fuels in sunny regions. And installations like this, which are very big, they have generation cost down to as low as $5 per kilowatt hour. And this is only the beginning. I think in due time, we will see generation at cost between 1 and 2 cents per kilowatt hour in sunny regions. This, of course, will not be the price level or the cost level in small applications, but it shows you that we can certainly benefit from the spectacular development of technology on the one hand and market volume on the other hand to access the markets in rural regions at affordable prices for an increasing number, hopefully a rapidly increasing number of people. Now, to finalize, I think it's time to restore the balance. As I mentioned, in the photovoltaic technology sector, there is a very exclusive, at least among most people, exclusive attention for the high volume gigawatt scale markets that are responsible for, to a large extent, for the cost reduction. But impact, of course, is not just measured in terms of gigawatts. Impact is measured also in terms of what it does with individual households or individual people. It's about the value of energy rather than only the cost of electricity. Sustainability, although some people tend to forget, is more than just CO2. And what we now see is that innovative financing is now meeting the photovoltaic technology development in the large-scale markets, which leads to a kind of explosive mixture, as also Bloomberg has explained in a recent great television program on Dutch television. This is where disruptive effects in the energy markets start to occur. This is not about those markets. This event is not about those markets, but we can certainly benefit from the great cost reductions and the experience that has been built up all over the value chain. I think if we are able to benefit from the cost reduction, maintain a very high quality, then we have a product of choice for the rural application that is the focus of your conference today. So I think it's time to put rural access back high on the agenda, not just of the people in this room. It's very impressive because the room is full, but I can assure you, if you go to a solar energy event, you can easily have 10 times more people in the room than we have here. So it's time to put this back on the agenda on a high position so that also the people in the PV sector start to see the importance, the challenges, but also the benefits in the development of the rural areas. So with that, I think it's time to go back to normal as soon as possible, meaning back to solar. We came from solar just less than 2 centuries ago. We happen to be here at this peak, but it's just a coincidence. You are lucky or perhaps not so lucky to witness that, but of course, within a few decades from now, we have to go back to a society that runs on renewables with a key role for solar energy within that mix. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Wim Senke. We'll now start with the next session. My name is Anthony Godara. I'm on the board of ARE. My company is Nigerian KXN Nigeria Limited, and I'm also on the board of the African Renewable Energy Alliance. Now, about 2 months ago, Bill Gates reminded us all that 30 years ago, I mean, over the last 30 years, Africa, excluding South Africa, is now using less electricity than it did per head of population. That's because the population growth has outstripped the supply. But as Dr. Simke has just pointed out, and we all have validated that, the prices of systems, solar, have dropped considerably, and there has been huge technological advance, especially in in the telecom sector, the wireless sector. And on this panel today, I think we are so lucky that we've got people here who exemplify exemplars of very fast growing sectors. We've got a fee-for-service model. We've got Chris Service from Foundation Rural Electrification Service here. Then on the pay-as-you-go model, we have here Davidi, Vortman. And also here we have Christopher Brand Baker from their respective companies. And of course here you have a full bibliography here. And then in terms of the partners, of course, there's Kern Peters from Google and David Otieno from the EU-EI Partnership Development, the partnership PDF, yeah, okay. So first, I'd like to call on David, if you would, to, oh sorry, may I change that? Chris, Service for Fee-for-Service. You've been in Mali over 10 years. Tell us about successes of your company and what it means for us all.
Absolutely. Thank you, Anthony. Well, firstly, welcome everyone, and I hope you're enjoying this fine Amsterdam day. As I'm sure you can appreciate, it's sunny every day in Amsterdam. I'm filling in here for my colleague Jibril, who unfortunately couldn't make it from Mali today. So I'll give you a brief, very general overview of FRES, what we're doing in Mali and other countries, and if you have any specifics, please feel free to throw them at me in the Q&A or afterwards during the break. So FRES, who are we? Well, we're a small non-profit based here in Amsterdam, and we're working to accelerate rural electrification in sub-Saharan Africa. The way we do that is by establishing small-scale DISCOs, rural utility companies in off-grid areas where we don't expect to see grid electrification or otherwise within the next 10, 15 or more years. With these companies in place, we recruit local staff, we train them up, and we roll out a more or less standardized business model which we refer to as fee-for-service, which we'll go into detail in a bit later on. I think the key element about FRES and how we work is that although we ourselves are a non-profit, our local companies are commercial. And the premise behind that is if FRES were to fall over as of tomorrow, our local companies would be able to stand on their own 2 feet and be able to keep supplying the electricity that our end customers promised. So the other key element is that we, as the headquarters, basically work as a project developer from concept through to implementation. From there on, we hand it over to our local company, the commercial utility, who takes care of operations, management, and maintenance. We also have some broad level oversight into how they're working. In terms of technology, we work with solar home systems, which is our core product, and also a growing number of mini-grids, which are PV-based hybrids. So just to give you a sense of the scale, we're currently working in 5 countries, employ 230 odd staff within our companies, and indirectly have a further 240 indirect contractors that work part-time or full-time, depending on the company. We've seen significant growth in the last 5 years, roughly 25% per year, year on, and in terms of PV capacity, that translates to 3.5 megawatt in total. So the fee-for-service model, I'll give you a brief summary of this because we do get asked a lot of questions. It's as the name suggests, you pay a fee for the electricity service that you ask for. This is no different than what you have in Europe, and similarly to Europe, the customer is not expected to own any of the energy assets. So our local company in Africa is the same. We own the assets. We are responsible for the quality service, the maintenance, and to make sure that if your battery breaks, your charge controller breaks, your lamp breaks, we're there to replace it at no extra fee. So as you can imagine, with a model such as that, quality assurance and customer service are key attributes, and therefore the training of our local staff and our contractors and personal development within the company is a key attribute of our model. The other aspect is a lot of times we get asked, where exactly do you fit into the market? And we like to consider ourselves as catering to the productive use sort of market. So electricity, beyond basic lighting. We're looking to support a broad range of appliances, be them radios, televisions, right up to refrigerations, or in the case of Mali, where we have mini-grids, we're also supporting ovens and mills for bakeries and even a local radio station. So that's really where we see our market value. And for those who prefer numbers, we're basically talking 200 watt hours and above is sort of the typical range that we work in. So in terms of tariffs, we're obviously working in quite difficult circumstances, and we look at a three-step process. Firstly, affordability through our market research before we decide to move into the country. We look at what can people in these communities actually afford. Secondly, we look at what do our companies need to make a financial profit, so covering all costs now and in the future, and also making small provisions for a profit margin. Balancing those two typically comes down to financing, and we typically use equity with some percentage of grant financing to date, although I must say that is evolving, as I'm sure you can all appreciate. Very briefly, some of the key challenges and lessons learned that we've seen along the way. Firstly, policy. I know things are developing very quickly in Africa, but there's a long way to go, and a key element of that would be having sustainable tariff structures, not dictated at the national level, but negotiated between the project developer and the community itself. Aside from that, other things such as streamlining licensing procedures, and also having transparency when it comes to grid electrification plans is a key element. Non-payment of our customers with a fee-for-service model is also a challenge. It's a manageable challenge, and it's something that requires constant attention. And we've found over the years that a balance between technical solutions but also social solutions, so social pressures amongst the community, has been the most effective tool in Mali and our other countries. And with that, I will wrap it up and leave it to the others. But thank you.
Thanks, Lord. Now, Davidi, would you like to? Lumos is working, I know, in West Africa, in Nigeria in particular. It's a tough environment, people say. Please tell us about your model and your successes, please.
Thank you. Glad to be here. Thank you all for coming. First, I'd like to tell my peers here and other companies in the space that I think that this revolution is tremendous. In the last 3 years, we really jumped from 0 off-grid systems that are being sold in Africa to thousands of systems being sold every day in Africa. And that's mostly private money. It's mostly entrepreneurship of, combination of business model and technology. And I think, this is really amazing. And it's amazing to be part of this industry. And I hope that if we sit here 2 years from now, we'll see hundreds of thousands of systems, sold every month. We have a huge target, which is 600 million people in sub-Saharan Africa without electricity today, and 700 million people in Southeast Asia without access to electricity, and this number is only going to grow. A few words about Lumos. We're a for-profit Dutch company with the objective of serving the people who are not connected to the grid in sub-Saharan Africa, and Southeast Asia. We believe that a successful commercial venture is the only way to scale. Because if we look at the telcos and how they were able to access 80% of the population, where if we were sitting 10 years ago and I was telling you, listen, 80% of the people will have a mobile phone in these markets, you will laugh at me. And it happened because the technology was affordable, and because it was accessible, and because external money was interested investing in these telcos. And I think we can do the same thing for energy. Our first market is Nigeria because it's the largest market in Africa. It's the largest country. It has the largest GDP. We started to work there last year. And it's amazing to see what's happening on the ground. We are growing 100% month over month. People are, just selling this by themselves. They are just selling to neighbors and family, and even carrying our systems 800 kilometers from where we sell them. So it's really growing viral. We are selling a system that is fairly large compared to maybe what you see in East Africa. It's a 80-watt panel and a lithium-ion battery. It's about a third of a kilowatt, and it's a lease-to-own model. So people pay an initial setup fee for the system, which is affordable, and then they buy amounts of days of electricity. It could buy a month or 3 months or 6 months, etc. And this is all done via their mobile phone. So we work together with MTN, who's our exclusive partner in Nigeria, and we use their airtime system. So every MTN subscriber can go to the store, buy a system for a setup fee, and start using it. And at the end of the 5 years, they own the system. So we unlock it, and they can use it for free. Of course, we have different upgrade models and data that is being collected on each and every user, which helps us understand the market, improve operationally, and also upsell additional products or services going forward. Thank you.
Thanks. What are your... Now, that's great, You said 100% growth month on month so far. And Chris, you pointed out 25% annual growth, did you?
Annual.
Both of which superbly beat the 3% population growth. Again, seems to establish that, distributed renewable energy is the way by which you can deploy at scale and cheaply. We have to get past this $700 billion mindset by 2030 and do it for 10% of the cost quicker by 2025. So please, let me ask Christopher.
Yep, sure. Thanks. Thank you very much, Tony. Thanks for everyone for being here. In terms of Bbox, I'll just give you a quick introduction to what we do, and this will follow on very nicely from what Davidi's already said. The two businesses are very similar in that regard. Bbox is a vertically integrated solar home system provider and distributor. We operate primarily in East Africa, so we focus on Kenya and Rwanda as our two main markets. We employ about 250 people around the world, engaged in product design through to manufacturing and then end customer financing and distribution. In terms of our numbers, in terms of what we've been doing over the last few years, we've been running about 6 years. We have just over 65,000 products out in the field at the moment, with around 20,000 of those in East Africa and the rest with partners that we've been working with quite heavily over the last few years. In terms of what we do and our main challenges, the main things that Bbox works on, Davidi touched on the monitoring aspect of systems and the data that's being collected. All of our solar home systems are remotely monitored, so we're able to understand how they're performing in quite a lot of detail. We're able to see how the customer's using them. We're able to see how the system's performing in terms of the battery life, and crucially intervene if necessary to replace or repair part of the system, providing a constant amount of energy to the user over its lifetime. Again, very similar models to what Davidi's just touched on. We're pay to own over 3 years. The customers pay monthly or weekly using mobile money. And those tools that we've touched on have really enabled us to operate and to expand our businesses extremely quickly in the last couple of years. Particularly using mobile money services. We started using cash collections around 3 years ago and have quickly moved to mobile money in the last few years, and that's really revolutionized our business model. In terms of what we need and our challenges going forward, some of the big things we're working on, local sources of finance, so our local businesses in Kenya and Rwanda accessing local sources of finance. We've recently done a securitization of our assets in Kenya at the back end of last year, and it's a small one, but we're looking to do more of those in the future, and we think that's an interesting way of accessing local sources of finance. That's probably the main one. I think touching on in terms of job creation, I think Tony, you want to talk a little bit about that later in the session, and that's something particularly finding good quality middle management within some of the countries we're working in. That's particularly tough, and some of the challenges that we see. That was a very quick introduction, but I think hopefully that will give some questions which will come out later in the session.
We're doing well for time. So look, you just touched fleetingly. I think you were being very modest about this securitization, which I think was a unique thing, the first time it's been done. If you don't mind telling us, it was a few million, wasn't it?
Yeah. It's just constrained to Kenya at the moment, in Kenyan shillings. So it was around 2,500 of our customers. We'd like to do more of them. It is quite small, and comparatively speaking, the legal fees for that sort of size of transaction is quite high, as you can appreciate. But we'd like to do more of those in the future and expand those. It's certainly an interesting tool which we can look to use to expand local sources of finance.
Right, thanks. Now, David Otieno, you represent one of the long-standing partners of rural electrification. So please tell us what you do and how you can help.
Thank you so much, Anthony. Probably I'm also among the panelists, not a business person, but I have another life before joining the EUIPDF, where I headed an association on solar energy. And I was glad to meet, when I heard Dr. Silke mentioning about Caroline's father, I just thought of Frank's father, whom we worked also in the late 90s. And that just tells you that the solar revolution, the solar industry is kind of growing. If you look at what happened in Kenya, for instance, where I come from, and Africa in general, lots has happened since the late 80s, 90s, and up to now. There is a big difference. When I go back to the tea farmers that I used to work with in the late 90s in Meru, for some of you know, in central Kenya, where tea farmers were really yearning to get even one bulb of electricity. Right now, you go there, they're going to buy themselves for it, and they can get a shop nearby to fix the system. I think that is quite a big progress that has happened. As Anthony just mentioned, my name is David Otieno. I work for the EU Energy Initiative, a facility known as Partnership Dialogue Facility. It's kind of usually a boring name to just say EUIPDF, that is the acronym. I work as a project manager. We mainly working in different service lines, and I'm sure one of which is partnering very closely with ARE to organize this forum. But in particular, I head the Secretariat of the Africa-EU Energy Partnership. And this is where I think, and that is the message that I thought I should also bring to this table, is policy is extremely important to any piece of work that the private sector does. Not only in our business, where we're talking about on solar energy, and I think this one I could give you examples in the 90s, how the private sector kind of used the government, let's say the policy, to kind of increase the sales, but also to reduce the prices of solar home systems during that time. So what we do at the Africa-EU Energy Partnership is mainly to engage high-level policy makers, politicians, both in Europe and in Africa, on energy issues. This is done in various fronts. What we've done is mainly to organize sessions where high-level politicians, both at ministerial level, but also on a working level, to kind of engage with their counterparts in Africa to be able to kind of unlock what is always referred to as energy poverty in Africa. And I think this is something that we've seen fruits. The partnership came into being roughly 10 years ago. And we've seen this cooperation between the Europeans and Africans into kind of supporting each other on energy. As you know, of course, naturally, anyone would say, all right, Africans are benefiting from this cooperation, or maybe the Europeans are benefiting from this cooperation. But we've seen kind of what we call scratch my back, I scratch yours. In Europe, it is a totally different story. We're talking about energy security. And Europeans are looking into Africa kind of to support this element of energy security. We're looking at North Africa in this respect as well. But also, on the other hand, Europe is looking for expansion of markets. We've just heard of numbers and the percentages of people that are not have not seen electricity. They will not see it in the next next years. And this is kind of a huge potential for the European market. On the other hand, Africa is looking for this kind of experience because European has come a long way. I mean, where you are now with the percentage of electrification. I now live in Frankfurt, and my children were just wondering why there's not been blackouts where we used to kind of get used to it. So this is something that we should not, I mean, Africa and Europe are kind of, if you so wish, continents are just neighboring each other. And we have experience that European has had over decades that could be transferred into a market that is very fast growing. And this is, let's say, an aspect where we from the Africa-EU Energy Partnership are engaging very closely and in a very, let's say, strategic way with politicians to kind of make sure that this terminology of energy poverty is not repeated, let's say, after 2020. Why do I say 2020? We have clear targets that our leaders, both from Europe and Africa, have set to be achieved by 2020. Of course, 2020 is just across the door. So this has to be looked at. What does it mean? What have we achieved? How can we, let's say, track the progress for all this work? So this is what I could mention as of now, and maybe also in terms of seeing how policy could be able to influence the work of the private sector. Thank you.
Right, thank you. So, Koen, with the Googler, you've done great stuff in regard to quality assurance, and I noticed even from the earlier session, how valuable that has been to members. I think S&V, the gentleman from S&V, pointed out that if some of the participants in their programs were not offering equipment which had passed this quality assurance, were not considered. Perhaps take this on, see what value do you give us all.
Thanks very much, Anthony. And thanks very much to Ara. Congratulations on the birthday, the 10th birthday. We are the younger sibling of Ara. We're just 4 years old. We can learn a lot from Ara. We are working increasingly together with Ara, I'm pleased to say, because we have not entirely the same, but still largely overlapping objectives. So Gogla, the name is a bit confusing. It suggests we only focus on lighting. What we do is focus on solar lanterns and solar home systems. We've got 75 members, mostly industry members, both manufacturers and distributors. And we held our own specific solar lantern, solar home systems event in Dubai about half a year ago. Where 500 people came to Dubai for 4 days of an intensive deep dive and an exhibition in this space. 500 people, of which the majority paid something between $900 and $1,200 just to be admitted. And I think that showed how this sector is emerging. While still young, it's becoming an active and live sector that is growing up on all fronts, from the financing to the quality assurance to the service models, the business models, on all different angles. It's growing up. A couple of the takeaways from that was that one of the big things that we presented was the slides that went into this report that Nico Tijabi presented earlier, with an overview of the market status. And it clearly shows that it's not just many people coming to a conference, but also increasing numbers of products being sold and households being reached. Some 20 million products sold, 90 million households, a million people reached. Clearly, with those numbers coming from a standing start 5, 6, maybe up to 10 years ago, shows that the demand for these products, the demand for commercially sold products is clearly proven. Selling light is easy. Selling phone charging capacity for somebody who otherwise will need to walk 2 hours to a kiosk is easy. Selling light and electricity to somebody otherwise needs to pay for the diesel is not that difficult either. What is difficult is getting the products there, getting skilled people there, getting the working capital to get your products in there. That's all the difficult stuff. But the demand is solid. The majority of the products are still being sold through over-the-counter cash sales, and that's where we count the millions of products being sold every year. Mostly very small products, just simple lanterns starting at $5 to $8 and going upwards. And this is a market that is growing fast, but it's also a bit under pressure because it has low entry to market. So increasingly, we find non-branded products on the market, generic products as Bloomberg labeled them. Not all of them are bad quality, but you can't see from the outside. So some will last for 3 to 5 years, while others last 3 to 5 weeks. And we need to be able to tell customers and those responsible for guarding those consumer rights how to tell them apart. You credit Gogla for that quality assurance scheme. That's a bit too much credit. This is a Lighting Global program initiated by World Bank and IFC. They run that scheme. We're closely cooperating with them to make sure that that scheme is continued into the future, that governments and programs recognize those programs, and that this is one way to help figure the poor products from the good products. Another pressure point for those market is working capital. And if we have working capital to help the distributors, that could be a real game changer in helping grow this market further. What is the big story that came out of Dubai, of course, is how the pay-as-you-go market is evolving. Several people have commented it's a hype, but it's the justified hype. We saw from the investment figures that Bloomberg put on the slide earlier, it's peaked in the last quarters of 2015. The biggest transaction so far, I think, was the 45 million transaction from Off-Grid Electric in December 2015. This is taking off really fast, but it's still at the beginnings also. Mcopa is taking half of the numbers achieved in that market. So we are really keen to see what happens. One of the big game changers there is big amounts of debt financing to help companies put more products in the market, and quickly increasing as a barrier in the barrier rankings is capacity of skilled personnel to help these businesses roll out further and get replicated. And the fifth takeaway from that conference was that the policy recognition of how distributed solutions, mini-grids, solar home systems are important for energy access, that's picking up. That's recognition. The action that needs to follow from that still need to come by and large. So this is an important element. That's advising Gogla's strategy as we go forward. Things we focus on is advocacy towards governments, investors. We don't do that alone. We do that with other associations, Alliance for Electrification, for example. We're really glad to have them on board. Africa Renewable Energy Association, I'm very glad to have them on board, Anthony. NGOs such as Practical Action, Shara Club, SolarAid. It's the campaign Power for All, where we try to influence the multilateral development banks, try to reach out to national governments and towards investors, letting them understand how distributed energy solutions can contribute to energy access. We work on very primary market data, sales data, counting the products that are being sold, translating that into impact information, underpinning the work that Bloomberg can do. We facilitate investments through events similar to this one, or jointly with ARA on these kind of events. Also really going down into the detail of how can we harmonize the definitions being used by pay-as-you-go solutions to make it easy for investors to understand that. And quality assurance is certainly going to be a big theme on our agenda for the next years. Right. Anthony, you've been looking at me. I'm running over my time, I think. No, sorry.
Well, thank you very, very much. Okay. Now, I'd like to dig a bit deeper now with my colleagues. Let's look at things from a point of view of the Africans, the countries in which you're operating. You know, the jobs created, temporary and long, and the cost of your product. Now, if these things are, the devices are taking 5 years to pay off, and if you're borrowing money locally, in some countries say over 20%, or internationally from commercial investors at, I don't know what, 15% or something, over 5 years, it seems to me that the cost of the product is mostly money, financial. You're paying financial fees. And if this is the case, aren't you at risk from people who come in with cheaper products which are just sold immediately outright at half the cost? First point on that. Also because of the length of the time, changing competition, more advanced products. And finally, perhaps, the kind of support you have in the market. What happens if you have somebody come in and say, oh, they're going to give out 1 million solar home systems, which is not fanciful. A major company said that in Kenya. What happens to your model? Or if the government, having been supportive at the beginning, suddenly decide to change the game plan, you know, perhaps the grid's extended. So many things can happen. The risks, how do you cope with these risks? Christopher?
Yeah, it's not an easy business, Tony. Yeah, no, I think from our point of view, just going back to the question about the customer, for us, there's two things really that we do. So having that relationship with a customer over a long period of time, we try and bring the barriers to entry down as low as possible. So we're starting at payment plans around $6 a month at the moment to try and get pricing down as low as possible, and then work with that customer over a long period of time to build trust with them in what we do and what we deliver, allowing them to upgrade. So by the end of their payment plan, they might be paying us $20, $25 a month and accessing a far wider area of services up to TVs and additional lighting. So I think having that contact with the customer is extremely important. Giving them service over a long period of time, so you build that relationship with them, is important. I think that's what we do on the customer piece. On the local financing side, yes, it is tough in terms of the rates we're paying, but actually, to be honest, this market is quite profitable. Over a long period of time, the customer's paying you sort of an average $12 a month over those 3 to 5 years. You're talking landed cost of the product in the $200 to $300 range. It can be actually quite a profitable enterprise to do this business. So it can be quite attractive for commercial investors. It's starting to get a lot more attractive, particularly in the last 18 months or so. And I think helping, one of the things we really want to try and do is help unlock local sources of finance to bring the costs of that local finance down, including debt guarantees. It can be one of the ways of doing that. So a lot of challenges out there, but I think you can work on some areas to help build that relationship with the customer over a long period of time and bring down the cost of finance.
What's your take on this?
So I think it all starts with the value to the end user. In Nigeria, believe it or not, we are fighting against the product that exists in the market for years. It's called a generator. And we are replacing generators. And you ask yourself, okay, so why are people replacing their gen? The reason it's more expensive, it breaks, there's no warranty, and the fumes and the noise are really troubling the families and the small businesses that are using gens. Every month, a family in Nigeria dies from fumes of a gen that was left to work all night. If you ask an average Nigerian, is there such a thing as constant electricity? He will tell you no, there's nothing like it. And we are delivering a new type of customer experience, which is constant electricity. It's a new type of electricity that is clean, is quiet, and is constant. And this is really a revolution in the eyes of the customer. And I think that, if you're talking about competition, the way I see it is we are really disruptive to the generator market, and this is what we are competing against. There are 100 million generators in Nigeria alone. And just imagine how much fuel they are burning. I think your point about getting us to the millions of systems is really a financing question, right? I mean, the fact that it's expensive to get debt in the local markets and also from outside markets is true. But there are some breakthroughs, and I'm happy to tell you that we just announced recently a $15 million debt facility from OPIC. OPIC is the U.S. government funding arm for emerging markets. They used to mainly do GE, gas turbines, stuff like that. But we are the first off-grid project on a large scale that they are doing, and we're very proud of that. And we believe that if you compare the time to market of $50 million or $100 million that are going into a power station in Africa, and how much time it will take to build a station, and how much time it takes to actually get the electricity to the end users, we're probably talking about 8 years. And that's, if the regulation works. And OPIC sees time to market of, 6 months in our case, from the minute they gave us, the debt to the minute the user gets the electricity. And I think this is the concept that we need to understand, that it's not that the on-grid type of projects, are risk-free, right? They take a lot of time, they have a lot of risks, and I think we can together, convince the industry that off-grid, in some cases, especially when there is no grid, is a much better approach, more economical, more efficient, and should attract the same type of capital that a power station would attract.
Okay. Now, I'm going to ask 2 special questions, but before I ask those 2 special questions, I'd like to know what you are doing in African countries. Given your high rate of growth, it's obvious that the capacity to maintain your models, your systems, will be lagging. And I noticed that a number of you have academies for training. Now, what can you do to put together, benefit from common training programs? What benefits can you offer partners, potential partners in Africa? Because also you've pointed out how you're raising these large sums of money, but these large sums of money seem to be funding the inventory right up to the point of landing, it seems to me. So what happens to the distribution last mile? Who's raising money for the Africans? I mean, it's their responsibility, but you can help. Maybe because you can raise money at cheaper costs, you can maybe cover some risks. Can you please deal with these issues?
Yeah, sure. In terms of job creation locally, I think the main gist of the question. If you look at when we open a new shop in a particular area, you're talking about instantly creating around 10 to 12 jobs in that particular region. If you do that and replicate that many times over the course of a month, the number of people that you have to train is incredibly large. We do have an academy. We do run training sessions. We have a team of full-time trainers. In terms of how we could utilize other businesses to help us help support us in that. Many of our frontline staff have never picked up a computer previously. Some basic training in that area would be extremely important for us to help leverage. We do a lot of very basic training locally to help skill our frontline sales and support staff. So certainly we'd be really interested to find out more about how we can partner with local businesses that can work in this area.
Okay. Anybody else like to?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think I mentioned in my introduction that I think ongoing training and personal development is a key attribute of the FRES model. And we've found that, of course, once you train people, they also have many skills that they can leave with. Although companies are generally rather considered a cornerstone of the regions we work on, there is a relatively high turnover in some of these countries. So we are constantly in need of training new staff, be them technical or sales staff. So as of last year, for quality control and quality assurance reasons, we started a Train the Trainers program. The first year was in Uganda, focused on technical trainees. So basically the 2 senior staff within the technical department of each company would go to Uganda, along with a number of university students from the local area, and have an intensive 10-day training course with a technical expert from France, actually, and learn how to take their skills and turn it into to be the teacher, so that they can go back to their local countries, train their local staff and a few students, and actually pass on those details instead of as a senior technician, but as a senior teacher. And yeah, it's an ongoing process. 2016, we're focusing on sales and marketing, and we've seen positive results so far, and we expect to sort of broaden this in the future.
Right. Thank you. Yes, Koen.
Add a comment on that. But fantastic as these initiatives sound, I also the thought also comes to me that it shouldn't be businesses that are doing these very public, investing in these very public goods of basic education and training skills. So I think it's up to Gogla and ARE working with national renewable energy associations to point the grant-funded programs, government-funded programs, public-funded programs on the need to have these capacities and work with them to set up these skills so that the businesses can focus on the things that businesses do best and not work on those investment activities. We started half a year ago with we've had 2 initial meetings with the National Renewable Energy Association. We hope to move further and certainly want to do that jointly with Alliance for Electrification.
Okay.
Maybe just to add.
David, yes, please go ahead.
Maybe just to add briefly on the training. I mean, I fully agree with what Koen just mentioned about, let's say, carrying out training. Giving training to those who can carry it out. But I know that private sector companies, let's say, would have specific trainings for their product line and all this. But at the same time, I think it is good to kind of, consider that the centers, like if you look across Africa, there is a couple of regional centers that are coming up, like the ECOWAS Regional Center of Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency, East Africa as well. SADC is also coming with the same, and all of them are kind of putting training or capacity building as, let's say, a strong element. And if you look at from the partner side, I mean, the topic of capacity building is now top on the discussions. We will just be meeting in Milan in a month from now, and capacity building or training per se will be kind of one topic that private sector, civil society, I mean, and in this case, we're not talking only about private sector, but also, the academia comes in very strongly. So this is something that we need to think about how, can be done collectively in addition to just the product line trainings. Thank you. Right,
okay, thank you.
Just to add to what my colleagues here said, solar as a service requires local skill set, both on sales and service. And to give you an example, we have 150 employees in Nigeria, but I believe we have around 500 indirect employees, people who are installing systems, people who are teaching other people, and all our installations are done either by the users themselves or by the local carpenter, the local handyman that was trained by us and is doing the installation for the user. So we see this job market created.
Okay, thanks. Now, in about 3 to 4 minutes, I think, I'm going to call for questions from the audience. Not just yet, please. But first, I've got 2 questions to ask my colleagues here. The first one is, what kind of funding do they actually need? And the second question is, would they say that impact return is more important than commercial return? So please, who will take that up first?
Sure. So addressing the second question, I think in the last 18 months, 2-3 years, certainly commercial returns have become more important in our view. The impact is there. I think it's a side effect of generating commercial returns. As I mentioned previously, it can be quite an attractive business that we're in. I know we are dealing with sectors of the population that can only pay very small amounts on a weekly or monthly basis, but summed up, I think it's an extremely attractive business to be in for us. There's a reason why we're in it. On the first question, which is around
what sort of money, what kind of
so
funding do you require?
in terms of the sources of capital, I mean, the main thing that we work on at the moment is local sources of debt finance to fund our working capital chain. Producing a product, distributing it, getting it in the hands of the customer, and getting a return on that can take 15 to 18 months in our case. So it is quite a long chain. That does require capital over the course of that chain. Local sources of finance would be great. Removing FX risk of US dollar investments would be fantastic if we can move towards that in the future. So I think that's certainly something that we're doing a lot of work on, as well as the securitization work, which we mentioned previously. So those two things, working capital for products and securitization to buy up the receivables, those are the two main aspects that we look at.
Thanks. You?
Yes. I think if you compare it to on-grid solar, right, I think we all understand that the reason that on-grid solar was able to reach commercial financing was the subsidies and the fact that the local governments were saying, here's the guaranteed price, and this really helped the banks go there. In the off-grid industry, we don't have this. We don't have any guarantee from the grid or from the government on prices. And we have a job together here to build a very robust model of KPIs that will serve the commercial funding industry, the Deutsche Banks of the world, okay, and the INGs, to really be able to look at this commercially. And this journey started already, okay, but we need to make sure that this is going to be standard, that this kind of data can be looked at from everyone at the same time, in the same glasses. I think if you look at your second question, what is missing,
the policies, yeah.
And I think that foreign exchange hedging is probably the hardest part. All these markets suffer from devaluations, and people find it very hard to look at US dollars going to Nigeria and not getting out, or getting out at the wrong rate. So we need a solution for that. Another solution would be the working capital, which if you do manufacturing and it takes time to ship and it takes time to sell the product until you start getting revenues, you need this cushion of working capital that would be available in large scale. I'm not talking about $5 million or $10 million. I'm talking about really getting to, if we want to get to millions of systems, we need billions of dollars available.
Right, thanks. Anything else?
Well, I think I can just reiterate that I think it's perfectly answered, really. One thing to add is that the global economy tends to undervalue the social and environmental value within the commercial realm. So I think that's an ongoing challenge, and I think you can look no further than the uptake of sort of crowdfunding as that sort of shift is taking part. And it's obviously available at a higher level, but it does come with a lot of it just takes a lot of time and resources. But I think what's really limiting as well to obtain that commercial finance is the ticket size of some of these projects. Typically, ours are below that threshold that is actually of value to a commercial investor that needs to do their due diligence. They need to pay their rather expensive staff to do that. And that immediately puts many project developers out of the realm of commercial financing.
Okay, thanks a lot to my fellow presenters. Now I'll take questions from the floor. Please, that gentleman right here. And also, could you, if you don't mind, standing so we can identify you in case we need to speak with you, other people need to speak with you afterwards. Yeah.
Uli Süthoff, GE Renewable. Very interesting. Thanks a lot. Chris, I think it was, you just mentioned ticket size, right? So I'm really interested, how do you increase the ticket size? And that's also a question to Davidi and also to Christopher. How can you aggregate? How do you come to the next scale? So that it's interesting for a company like GE also. Thanks.
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think when I mention that, I'm specifically looking in the sort of micro mini-grid realm, which I guess are typically quite site-specific in terms of what is the demand profile of that particular village or industry whatsoever. So it's finding a balance between the standardization that you can handle as a project developer and the standardization required from the investor. What are you happy with that you can bundle, say, not just 5, 10 projects together, but maybe 50 or 100? And yeah, I don't know if I really have an answer for you, unfortunately, but yeah, maybe we can have a chat after this.
Yeah. Okay. Question, please. Yeah. You gentleman in front here. Yeah. Yeah.
Florian from UNIDO, United Nations Industrial Development Organization. I had two questions. You mentioned manufacturing. I was wondering if you also look into local manufacturing or if that's considered as an option. And you were mentioning also, no, you were not mentioning, but I was interested also in final disposal, especially after ownership has been transferred then to the people, or if you look into extended producer responsibility schemes or something like this. Thanks.
On the manufacturing question, we do all the manufacturing in China currently. We have explored local manufacturing. It is quite tricky in terms of building capacity locally. Certainly, if you're talking about making millions of units a year in one particular country, you may have to explore that in more detail. On the end-of-life issue, I mean, for us, we do a lot of work around continuing to monitor those systems, even when the customer has finished their payment plan with us, and providing long-term warranty agreements to allow the system to be supported over a long period of time, and then building local capacity again locally to recycle certain components. So it's an ongoing project. The capacity locally in many of these countries is pretty limited right now for recycling, and it's something we need to do a lot more work on.
Okay.
I think we're definitely going to see local manufacturing in the future. There's a way to go. It will attract, I believe, some global companies that are doing turnkey manufacturing. Like they went into India and China. It makes sense that if we do consumer electronics, it will go there as well. And we are thinking about this. And to your other question about disposables, this is something that we will take care of. When we reach the end of life of the product, which is 5 years, etc.
Thanks. A lady there, please.
Good afternoon. My name is Juliet Gbomita from Ghana. I work with DSTC Solar Training Center, and aside solar training in Accra, we do solar training for people in the north. My question is to Mr. David Otieno about your partnership works. In the previous slides presented, I see a lot of work being done in the southern and eastern parts of Africa, but not much in the west of Africa. And Anthony just asked where funding is needed. What DSTC does is to help rural farmers access some funding. And what we just found out with helping some farmers access the recently closed challenge, Power Africa Off-Grid, is that most of the information that is needed by such challenges, the rural farmers don't have access to the information. So for instance, even for the project intake for this summit, there was a question on resource assessment that is available on your farm. And we had one farmer who couldn't apply for the Power Off-Grid challenge because he doesn't have a passport. But this is somebody who has been working in the solar industry since 1985, and he sells...
Sorry, may I ask you to make the question, please?
Yes, the question is whether the partnership, the Africa-EU partnership, has a platform where rural farmers that we are talking about, that is a focus for us, can access funding. Is there somebody that they can talk to? Because there seems to be a disconnect between what we are talking about and what is happening rurally. Thank you.
So maybe I could just, thank you so much. Maybe just to mention here, you're absolutely right, this bit of, I would not say disparity, but a bit of, let's say, initiatives focusing on certain regions more and less of the other regions. There could be reasons for this kind of disparity. What we're doing currently, and this is something that will be launched in a month from now, is to map out initiatives across Africa to be able to inform the development partners, but also the policymakers in terms of where exactly which initiative is happening. Because, I mean, the trend we've seen, as you've just rightfully mentioned, that there is more initiatives, let's say training initiatives, or even electrification or cooking energy initiatives in certain areas, and less in other areas. Of course, there could be reasons that touch on, let's say, policy or reform aspects in those particular areas. So what we've done now is to come up or prepare a mapping of initiatives in Africa. And this is, let's say, a document that we will be releasing in Milan, as I just mentioned here.
Okay.
So that is one point. Secondly,
No, okay.
yeah.
Now, I'm afraid that we have been running on overtime now, and I must be considerate for the next presenter. If, sorry, Professor Bahaj, our president, Ernesto, who had questions maybe, any other person who has questions, stand up and see us outside. But if you kindly stand up, I'll be able to recognize you. But I'm not going to take the question now. Anybody? Okay, we'll look for you outside after. So I wrap up. I thank my panel very much, and the audience.